Hey, welcome to Cybersplainers. I'm Eric, here with another episode, and I want to talk today about cybersecurity solutions, the products, and how the industry changes from time to time. And there's consolidation of vendors, which means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It's going to be a challenging topic with a lot of sub areas we want to talk about, and different angles to go at it. But as we see acquisitions and mergers of cybersecurity solution companies, what I want to get to is that a good thing? Is it good when company X buys company Y to make company Z, or just to merge Y into X, and how does that look? How does that work? Is it a good idea to put all, or at least more of your cybersecurity eggs into one basket? All right. So welcome back to Cybersplainers. We are here. I'm pretty excited. I've got a couple of guests here that I've wanted to get on for a while. Let me introduce them first, and then we'll kind of explain why we're going to talk about this topic. First, in the studio here with me, I've got Michael Chiricosta, one of my colleagues from the day job, from the other side of my life, what pays the bills. And Michael joined us almost 5 years ago to the day, just a little bit under, as an SE. Essentially was the title at the time, to serve the role of identifying solutions for our customers and clients that would help solve their problems. Finding the right fits with the right products is kind of the majority of the job. And you've transitioned as the company's grown, and we've added additional SEs to that role, myself part-time included, to focus now more primarily on that technical vendor enablement and which vendors we're working with, which solutions we use, and which makes sense for us to sell.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we're at Atlantic Data Security, and in this role now, we want to be very strategic about which vendors we partner with, both from a technical perspective, the sales side of it, sure, but also from marketing. Like, we want to make sure we're bringing the right technologies to our customer base, and it's been really fun, actually. So it's been good.
So it requires you to understand the vendor landscape pretty well,
Exactly.
know who they are, even the ones we're not working with,
Yep.
to know what they do, how they differentiate has always been a big part of that role, is knowing where the right product is the right fit for the right customer.
Absolutely. It's trying to fit the right square into the right hole and all that fun stuff.
So there's an aspect of this title question we're going to talk about that is right up your alley, which is why I'm glad to find this one to get you here. But on the other coast, I believe you're home now, right? You're out on the West Coast, Yoni, a old buddy who's been in this space. He's not anymore, but he comes from the experience. And Yoni Liedersdorf, who was, when I met him, when I knew him way back, the founder of a company called Indeni, which was a cybersecurity solution product with a very niche market at the time, or a very niche solution at the time. It wasn't something that was a crowded space, what you were doing, and then had since sold that to a bigger company that was doing some of this consolidation of solutions, trying to bring it into a family of other things. So he's lived that life of selling a smaller company into a bigger one in the cybersecurity space. But now he's out of cybersecurity, so he can talk a little bit more openly, I think, than if you were still working for a cybersecurity product company. It might be a little more restrictive, or what do you think? Or tell me how that applies to you and what your perspective is, because you've been in the industry a while too.
Yeah, generally, I try to be honest anyway, and not offensive anyway. So even if I was in the industry, it would have been, I think, fine. But yeah, so my background, I started in cyber, actually, in the military, cyber offense, and then I went to work for Checkpoint, a vendor that probably a good number of the listeners here are familiar with. And when I was at Checkpoint, I saw a problem that customers were experiencing, and the industry didn't have a good enough solution. So I thought, this would be a good time to go and try to build something of my own, which was the beginning of Indeni, and really how we met. So yeah, I did go through the journey of building a company, building a product, working with many customers and partners, and then eventually selling it as part of a consolidation. So part of kind of what our conversation is today, but selling it to a company out of Canada called Lookout Networks. Also, some of the listeners might be familiar with. And yeah, I decided that my next startup is not going to be in cyber. It's in data and analytics. I started that company recently. It's called Solid, and it's a There are some parallels and some parallels even to the conversation we're having today, and then some very different things that I'm really excited about from a challenge perspective. So yeah.
Well, I'm so glad to have you here. And in your honor, I am actually wearing some legacy and Denny
Oh,
swag.
nice.
This was that.
Yeah.
If you remember these, what was it? Quick Flip, it's called. It's that hoodie sweatshirt that turns into a backpack that you
Yeah.
had set one aside for me at a conference many years ago. So, and it was perfect for today. I'm flying later tonight, so it's perfect for traveling too. So,
It's very comfy.
it,
And that smiley thing was on purpose. It causes people to smile back.
well, it's like the Amazon arrow on the Amazon
Yeah.
logo. It's in a smiley. It's even if people have paid attention to a analog watch, when they show pictures of
Oh,
a watch, the hands are always at 10 and 2
yeah.
because it's that uplift.
Yeah.
Sorry, psychological
Yeah.
marketing, subliminal stuff. Very cool. Like the negative space arrow in the FedEx logo. Hold on, I'm going down a whole different wrong channel here. But if you've never seen it, look for it. The arrow in the FedEx logo. It's between the E and the X. It's very subliminal, but it's there. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
There's also Baskin Robbins 31 flavors.
There's whole sites if you look at all these different symbols that are hidden within well-known logos. Anyway, this is the problem I have. The good challenge is people that I can talk to about anything for hours, and we've done this many times in person and remotely. Unfortunately, because remote, I can't shoot you with a Nerf gun either. That's a story for a different day. But consider me virtually trying. So we have our perspectives on this. We deal with vendors. We've dealt with vendors. We've worked for vendors. We've built solutions. You've built a company and then sold it. But there's so many different particular avenues we can go down for this. I like to start sometimes simply at the consumer level, just for a few minutes, where as a consumer, as an average home user of technology and of more specifically computers, when it comes to cybersecurity, we have this conversation a lot in different areas and a lot of different episodes. We at least touch on what it means to the consumer to have one tool that does a lot of different things. I think it's obviously a good idea because they don't have the bandwidth or the funding to get best of breed in every product category. They need to be as simple as possible. So when they have a Swiss Army knife of cybersecurity solutions in one product, I think that's a no-brainer that at the consumer level, it makes sense. Do we agree? Have we seen that be successful?
I fully agree with that. So being a cyber guy, I know that my kids probably download a lot of malware and, there's risk to my work laptop and, maybe even somebody would try to control our AC, etc. So I'm obviously sensitive to what they might be doing. But I don't have the bandwidth or the time to actually go and start buying all these different solutions and putting them together and managing them and making sure they work. So I really appreciate the fact that a lot of the more modern Wi-Fi routers have these capabilities built in, right? So, you pay another $10 a month or whatever, you turn on security and it's smart enough to help you. It's maybe not foolproof, but it identifies the needs to block certain devices or sort of quarantine them as needed, filter some traffic, etc. I think that's the way to go with consumers because anything beyond that would probably be too complicated for 99.9% of the population.
Yeah, I would also add, and not to name names, but I think an important part of that conversation is like Microsoft with their home stuff, right? Oh, sorry, with their home packages, because not just like the E3 or E5 licensing, but a lot of the stuff comes in the basic form for free when you purchase, the operating system or whatever, the subscriptions or whatever you have, and it's important because those tools like just on by default, like the firewall application on the endpoint, like that sort of stuff. No one, the regular consumer isn't thinking about things like that. And so, is it
Right.
to Yoni's point? Is it the end all be all? No, but for someone who's running a family doesn't have time, it's on. It's something.
Well, and I'm sure some of our listeners, like me, go back a ways, but and remember when Microsoft didn't include any anti-malware in an operating system. You were totally on your own, and most of us initially didn't even think about it. It wasn't an issue, and then industry evolves, where the bad guys start doing bad things with viruses. So we have to have defense. So an industry evolves around antivirus, and now there's this third-party solution you need to purchase to throw onto your devices and your operating system to protect from viruses. And then that continues to evolve and advance. And then eventually, just like with a browser, there was a time you had to buy a browser. web browser was a separate thing and it wasn't included in the operating system. That became a whole antitrust and weird legal issue when Microsoft started including a browser in the operating system. But building in antivirus, making it easy for the consumer is a good thing, and making certain features, and it's gone way beyond that. There's actually firewalling, and these terms have become more commonplace to the consumer now. They might not know fully, truly what a firewall is, but they know it's a thing, and they know they probably have one. They might not know the difference between a firewall on their desktop and a firewall on their router, or at their perimeter, or with their ISP, or with their company, but they understand that a firewall is something that hopefully protects them. And they don't have to think about it usually.
Yeah, exactly. That's the type of thing where, Yoni's point, like that's how like an AC doesn't get disrupted, or they just don't know. It's just on in the background, and they're paying for it anyway. So they add the feature and go from there.
I don't know if you guys remember, but actually 22 years ago, and I'm dating myself here, but I got gray hair. Eric, you do. Michael, I can't see from here, but maybe you do too. 22 years ago, August of 2003, if you just set up a clean Windows XP and connected it to the internet, it would immediately get hacked by the blaster worm. It took about 15 seconds to get hacked. And I remember, first of all, it happened to me. I was like, what's going on here? But also, it would happen to people around me. Back then, none of the consumers knew what firewalls were. Nobody knew that you really needed protection, antivirus, etc. So I had to go around and explain to people that there's this thing called a worm, and it's going through the internet. And once you connect a plain vanilla unpatched Windows XP, you're screwed. And they didn't know what to do with it, and it sounded so foreign. So I think the industry has come a long way over 22 years from those days, but that was an interesting career.
Well, so I think in short, we can answer one phase of the question, one perspective of the question. From the consumer level, consolidation is a good thing. It makes it easier, makes it more affordable, and in many cases covers things we might not even be thinking to cover. The consumer isn't looking for this new feature, but when they make an acquisition of another company or build out a new feature and integrate it within the product, now they can take advantage of that new feature without having to go seek it. So consumer level, it's great. It's still not the end all be all. Still, sometimes there are benefits to buying an additional product that does that thing better. But the other major difference in the consumer level is the value and the risk and your exposure and what you really are justified in spending to protect yourself is a whole different thing than at the corporate and enterprise and when we deal with compliance and all that. So it's much simpler of a discussion, and having simple products, whether it's what's included in your operating system or what came with your PC. And that's another place that a lot of those vendors find their ways in with deals with the computer manufacturers. So it comes bundled with something that, the operating system might have that feature, but they've added in this third party because they've been paid to. They've got some marketing deal to bundle some suite.
For a year plus,
and then you have to pay for it after that, and that's why they do it. This is where I'm going to pause for a second and disclaim a little bit that first of all, any opinions we express don't necessarily reflect those of our employers, because we may have to name some names here. We try to stay away from that and be very agnostic and be more conceptual here at Cybersplainers, but we're going to bring up examples, and I'm sure inadvertently we might drop names, maybe deliberately, as we come up with some examples where we've seen consolidation be good or bad, or just to help people understand what we're talking about. You already mentioned Microsoft, and that's a very big player. We know almost all of us use something from Microsoft. It's there, and you can't talk around it, and that's totally fine. And they've done a lot of what they do through internal building it out. They've also done some acquisition to add certain pieces, but there's some other really big companies. I'm going to throw a couple names out that I'm happy to talk about, but when we name these names, I don't think we're going to be saying anything super derogatory or super supportive. It's more just as examples that people will understand it. And in many cases, some of the ones I'm going to mention, we don't even know where it's going to go yet. It might become a good thing, might become a bad thing. Because in very recent news, dating when we're recording this, we've seen some big acquisitions or big announcements, and the acquisitions maybe haven't even gone through yet, of big cybersecurity players. Palo Alto Networks announcing the intent to acquire CyberArk. That's a huge one, very recent, one of the biggest we've seen. Others that are different in a sense, Google acquiring Wiz. Google isn't necessarily a specific cybersecurity player. they're just a bigger player in so many areas, acquiring a cybersecurity company. And we see others like MasterCard acquiring Recorded Future a year or so ago. That's, not a cybersecurity play purely. That's more they want to buy them because they want the product. And
Zscaler acquiring Red Canary.
there's so many that some of them are more business focused, some of them are more function focused and product focused. So there's so many different areas we can go around. We can talk about some of these examples. But I just want to warn, we don't mean any offense to anyone, and don't blame our employers if we say something you don't like. This is just our opinions, talking as people, being frank and open and honest. So, any thoughts on that? You agree with me, or do you want to be careful? Or is there anyone you want to not talk about?
I think everyone knows all of these things. Like, I'll step out and say it. Everyone knows that Palo Alto Networks spends a lot of money acquiring companies. And one of their main competitors spends very little acquiring companies. And that competitor has a new CEO, so things might change. But, there are certain things that they're just known in the market. So I think it's fine to say them. Some people might not like hearing them sometimes, but they're the truth, and it's fine.
And it is a lot of opinions. And yet we'll see years later how it played out and whether they're right or wrong. I'll say, it was about 6 weeks ago, I think the Palo CyberArk announcement came out, and there was a quote I read in an article. I'm not going to cite references, so if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But it was Shlomo Kramer quoting saying something about how this is going to be the end of a successful run of acquisitions by Palo. It's a bad idea.
I saw that.
And Shlomo was one of the original founders of Checkpoint, and then he went on to what was it, Imperva, and now Cato. So he's been at more specialized companies, and then. You mentioned it, that other company, Checkpoint, competitor of Palo, new CEO Nadav, in that same article I read, had quoted saying something about consolidation not being a good thing for the industry. And yet Checkpoint also has made, to your point, a lot of acquisitions, typically of less expensive, high-profile companies. Not entirely, because there have been some really big ones, really interesting ones. It's a game they all play, and they all play it differently, but then they'll all kind of take shots at each other, whether it was a good one or a bad one. And yet, I think even that answer is a tricky answer. There's a lot of nuance. Is it a good or a bad thing? It depends who you are.
It also, it depends on the priorities of the organization, I would say, or that's purchasing this, that's going to acquire or purchase that solution as consuming it, right? But I think from the thing that I've noticed the most is, what is the delta between trying to develop a solution that can compete with the solution you may want to acquire? Like, what would it take internally to build? And another example of this would be something like CrowdStrike, right? So they decided that they needed to have a better back end for their data logging, right? And this is kind of up your alley, Yoni. They acquired LogScale because they didn't think they could build a solution that would be that good. However, being an endpoint, an EDR player with a kernel level agent, they decided to build their own DLP solution to compete because they didn't want their customer base going out to look for another solution that would be better than them. Now, where they compete in the marketplace, that's the conversation we're going to have today. But it's what is the difference between investing in developing something, investing in developing something, or just acquiring a product and having a product that's like one of the best of breeds that you can do? And that's probably the question that, with the CyberArk thing, that's probably how that, what I would assume was an internal decision around, is it better to buy it or better to?
Yeah, I agree. But you also have a sort of a speed to market thing. So it's not just how much effort or cost it's going to be to build it. It's how fast you want to get to the market.
Yeah.
One of Palo Alto's acquisitions was Demisto. And when they acquired Demisto, the product already worked. I think ARR revenue was in the 10 or 20 million a year or something like that. And they knew that Demisto was a rocket ship. They knew that a year post acquisition, it's going to go into 50, 60, 70 million, and then 100, and it's going to grow from there. They just knew it. And so there's the building of the technology of Demisto itself, of the product. But then there's, I get it today, I close the deal today, and I let this team keep running, and they build a fantastic business. Like, in the case of Demisto, they were put in what's called a speedboat. Palo Alto call it a speedboat, which basically means they try not to interfere with how the team's running the business, and just giving, the Palo support, but not immediately ingesting them and killing all the life out of the startup. And, the CEO of Demisto, Slavik, really great guy. He has a third startup now. They knew they're going to put it in his hands, and the Misto is going to grow like crazy, even post acquisition. And I think that's more the value than just building it yourself. Yeah, building it yourself costs resources and people and somewhat time, but getting fast to market with a really, really good team is worth a lot of money to these
Yeah.
guys. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would agree with that completely. And also in some situations, the name value alone, right? The acquisition and you have the name value, that's going to allow, when they go to market with those solutions, it's we already hey, we've acquired this company, you may have heard of them, it's this and they have a recognition and yeah, I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, I think there's at a very high level, there's two simple different perspectives to take on these mergers, these consolidations. One is the business side.
Yeah.
Does it make business sense? Is there a business benefit to it? They wouldn't do it if there wasn't because they're in business to make money. So they're not going to make an acquisition that doesn't benefit the business somehow. Sometimes that's the only benefit. Other times, there's a bigger benefit to the actual product, the actual furthering and advancement of the tools and the solutions, which trickles down to the consumers, to the buyers, to the clients, to the customers, making the product better or more functional or easier or improving the experience and improving cybersecurity. So I think it's some, way more one or the other, improving the business or improving cybersecurity.
Yeah.
And I think I've read that some are thinking that the Palo CyberArk one is a higher on the business side of the benefit. It makes sense for them to get into that business and to take advantage of the company and the profit. It's going to be a good investment, even if they don't touch it. And that kind of goes to Yanni's idea of,
Yeah, I was
does
gonna
it make sense to let it continue running and doing what it's doing? It's a good company. They've got a good product. Don't rock the boat. Don't change that. Let's just continue helping them get better. And if we can find ways to then have that merger become beneficial to both sides by either stronger integration or consolidating some functions or, the old typical business acquisition and merger concept is, oh, let's eliminate overhead. Let's,
Yeah.
only have one HR department between both companies. Now we're saving money and we can both still be profitable and have less expenses. The more you do that, the deeper you go with it. Oh, only have one dev team. Now you're going to change the culture. You're going to disrupt the actual building of the company. And that's, I think, where it gets more dangerous.
What I think is to Yoni, to your point, it made me think of a Family Guy reference, so bear with me. But
I love Hollywood references. You know
yeah,
that.
I love Family Guy.
yep. So there's an episode where they have to go. The family has to go through a timeshare like tutorial, and at the end they could get a boat. And at the end of it, Peter's like, "Oh, I can get this boat," and they said, "Well, you could have the mystery box." And Peter goes, "It could be anything. It could be a boat." And it's like, so when you have something like CyberArk, right? It's like, do we want to spend the time and the money trying to create something that will be as good as CyberArk, or do we know that solution's there? So that's kind of in the middle of what you're talking about. Of there's a business side of it, which is to Yoni's point, exactly like just keep doing what it's doing. You know it's going to be there. CyberArk's a big player in that space, but also if we try to build something, is it going to come close? Why would we invest the cycles and the time and the money? So it made me think of Family Guy. I don't know, but that's fun.
I would say though that acquiring a company like Demisto and acquiring a company like CyberArk is very, very different. So
Okay.
when you're acquiring Demisto, you're acquiring the tech team, the CEO, the leadership, their drive, their motivation, their ability to execute. To Eric's point, you very quickly get rid of the HR and operational and finance teams because you don't need them after acquisition. That's how it works. Um, but so the Misto or the types, Palo Alto and the others acquired a lot of startups that were in those kinds of stages. So you're looking for a strong tech team and really, really motivated leadership that can sell this thing. When you acquire really big companies like CyberArk, it's quite different because you have two very established cultures here. You have two very different dev teams, marketing teams, sales teams, HR, finance, etc. Now, even if you have overlap on the HR, finance, operations side, and you get rid of some of it, you still have very different marketing schemes. You still have very different salespeople, sales teams. So that's harder to navigate. There's a lot more conflicting cultures or need to figure out how you deal with this. Also, the people in the acquired company, they know that some of them might not hang around for very long because they'll be considered redundant, somebody else in an acquiring company. So I think their journey of acquiring such a big company is very, very different to acquiring the smaller one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you touched on one of the key issues with these acquisitions is what's the benefit, what's the motivation. I touched on a little bit earlier, but it's what are they actually interested in acquiring? Is it the profitability, the future money making of it? Is it the intellectual property, the product itself is something they want to make part of their own product? Or is it the customers? And often it's just the customer acquisition. They've got a great,
Yeah.
install base, and we want to be able to more easily sell into that customer base. So there's others as well, but those are a couple of the big ones we've kind of danced around a little bit already. And in some cases, it might only be one of those things they actually care about. Like I mentioned, MasterCard acquiring Recorded Future. They're not
Mhm.
acquiring them to be able to sell credit cards to their customers. It's not about customer acquisition so much. It's the intellectual property. It's the deliverable, the product they have, the data, the developers. They want that to be in-house so they can take advantage of it. Maybe so they don't have to pay for the service and pay for the product. They just buy it and now they own it. And that's a very different one. It's not necessarily the profitability of that business as it is, but it might be okay. Others, I'll go back a few decades. IBM acquiring Lotus 1-2-3, Lotus Domino. I remember that was an issue. That was IBM's in one of those examples that comes up when you look into these big acquisitions where they've, for better or worse, Cisco's in the same boat, acquired a lot of companies that have then kind of disappeared or gone away. I will get into different motivations. I think Cisco's done it often just to eliminate the competition and ooh, this is a promising product. Let's buy it and get rid of it. So ours is best again, which I don't like as a technologist. And I think it's bad for the industry, but when you're Cisco, you can. But when IBM had done this, I think we're trying to get the customers, get that install base, not so much the intellectual property, but then they changed the company fundamentally and it ends up going downhill. It could have also just been bad timing where when that happened, Microsoft was just skyrocketing and Windows NT and Exchange were kind of making Domino less relevant. So it might have just been a bad timing. It might not have been the acquisition that killed anything. But I mean, what the motivation is and what the benefit might be varies so much that you can't classify them all the same way and say, is this a good or a bad thing? It's
Yeah, you can't. I think I think you can look at it from perspectives, right? Because when you try to look at it from an industry wide, it's hard because there are different players in the industry, different beneficiaries, benefiters from these actions. So I like to kind of break it into perspectives. So I like to say, okay, the companies that are getting acquired, there are startup founders that start those companies with the intention of solving a problem, building a business. Some of them with the hopes of getting acquired, right? So they have their motivation. Then you've got the VCs, which we didn't mention at all, but those are the people putting the money into these startups. Without VCs, we probably wouldn't have most of what we're used to today, whether it's mobile phones, whether it's the MacBook that I'm using, whether it's even the application we're using to record this. Without VCs, most of these would probably not be in existence. You can trace back the innovation explosion over the last 40, 50 years to VCs, to their concept. You got to think about what they're looking for, right? And they're very simple. They're looking for money. They want to put money in, and get a lot more money than they put in. So they're always thinking about, okay, this is a good team. I like the team, but they're thinking about, do I invest in this team and then make 10, 20, 30, 40, 50x on my investment 3-4 years from now when whoever bigger acquires them or when they go public? So, they're there. And so these two personas are important to analyze. And then, of course, you've got your customers, and it's important to see that customers are getting a lot more value as a result. And then you've got your partners who are selling these products to customers. So that's why I'm saying, when we're talking about industry, I think we need to look at it from the perspective of different actors.
Yeah, and I think to your point, the investors, the VCs that are providing the funding for these startups to grow and improve and get better and market themselves, they're purely business motivated. They're not
Right.
trying to protect the world. They're not trying to make the world a safer place for tech. They're there to make money, and that's not a bad thing. Again, that's what funds it. It funds development. Without it, we wouldn't have the things we have. So I'm not saying that in a derogatory way at all, but understanding what that motivation is. So if that same VC is investing in 3 or 4 different companies, it doesn't mean they're consolidated. But there are some cases where there might be a player, a bigger company that acquires other technology companies, other cybersecurity companies, that's really their only interest is acquiring them essentially as a funding company to take advantage of the revenue and make money with no plans for consolidation. Other times they might say there's plans to consolidate or integrate and make these disconnected products work better together and become kind of one unified product. And most of the time, from what I've seen, that doesn't work out. It's hard. And
so when you look at it, so I think that's, I think it's a really good point to look at it from the different perspectives, because and what I do and what I see every day, when you look at it from the actual the platform, so the vendor, right? So if you look at it from what they're trying to do, we talked about this example, so I'll use CrowdStrike again. There were their competitors were coming in and saying, well, they're using Splunk as their backend and they're passing that off to their customer base. So their whole kind of way to compete with them in the marketplace was saying, hey, we don't use Splunk in our backend because it's, it was more expensive. And so they would have, arguably or whatever, depending on the size. But, you know, when they acquired LogScale and brought them in, that was their way of kind of trying to shore up the marketplace in terms of how they can eliminate that threat from their competitors. And it ended up being a good solution for them. I think the same thing when I talked about their DLP processes, they already have an install base. They have their client at the kernel level sitting out there. For them as a business decision, and this is what I think it's the opposite of what we were talking about, where they're already there. They're just they wanted to build something that they could check that box and say they have that solution. They're an EDR solution. That's their bread and butter. So it's a little different. But they, instead of going out and acquiring a DLP solution, they weren't building backend stuff. They were building agents for endpoints. So they had that already in house. So again, different perspective, not from the VC or the founders, is more so for that business. Do I decide to build something or buy it?
I think there's actually also an interesting, like, if we take your example and even a step further. So you're talking about, CrowdStrike built their own DLP, they're on the agent anyway, etc. So George, the CEO of CrowdStrike, if I remember correctly, he was at McAfee prior. I might need to validate this, but I have that kind of thinking in my
think that's
mind.
right.
Maybe it wasn't, maybe I'm wrong. But I do distinctly remember McAfee starting as more of an antivirus and then over time acquiring all these technologies, including DLP, to the point where their agent was so heavy and complicated, it would crash computers. You would need a really powerful computer to run the McAfee agent, not even to use like for Excel and stuff. And that was a direct result of challenges and integration of acquired technologies. So it is possible that CrowdStrike also learned that lesson and said, okay, we could acquire DLP, but the agent is our bread and butter. And if we don't develop it ourselves, we have a risk on the integration side, making our agent less performant, more aggressive on the consumption side. And in the end of the day, not a good thing for our customers. So it's very possible that they looked at it from that perspective.
Yeah, that's a really good point too.
Is it possible you're not old enough to remember McAfee was purely AV? Yes, they were. And I was downloading my definition updates from CompuServe. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point too. I think definitely a possibility of that conversation. I think they already had the footprint. Their agent was already on there. So trying to if they were to acquire a solution that may have had, more capabilities, trying to bake that into what they've already had could have just been more work. That's part of it. But I think the decision making on their end is what fascinates me. Is we want to acquire this company for this, but to Yoni's point, we don't want to acquire something for this because we think we can do it at a rate. So that to me is what always makes me fascinated with it.
I've also seen sometimes a mix, and I don't want to call them out. We've already mentioned this company, but I've seen them do this a number of times, and unofficially, I've seen them develop it on their own. Let's build out this product category ourselves so that we can kind of compete with that third party that we might want to integrate with, and we do integrate with, but now we don't need them as much. So then when we go to acquire them, we don't have to pay them as much because they know we don't need them as much.
Well, that's the business.
And I've seen that happen a few times with one particular vendor where hey, we'll license it from them. We'll have a partnership, but then we'll go off and make it ourselves. And then in the next instance, we'll acquire them for less than we would have had to. And I've seen them do it at least a few times.
That's a very financial way of looking at things, right? It's, we're paying, we feel like we're paying too much for this specific vendor or partner integration. And so we're going to develop it internally and compete with it. I think there's, it's a way to look
But
at it.
we
It's
know
a way
theirs is
to,
better. We're never going to be able to reach their level, or to be too.
yeah,
It wouldn't be cost effective. But we don't want to pay that much for them yet. So we want to show that we're not dumb. We can do this, and
yeah,
it's a negotiating tactic, is all it really is. That involves developing in time, and it's a purely business thing. From a consumer, from an end result to cybersecurity perspective, it's all development. It's all competition. Competition is good. Having, if one, and I mentioned this earlier, Cisco's done this a number of times, acquiring a promising potential startup with a great technology that's eating into their market share a little bit. So they just buy them, and it's too expensive and not profitable. It's purely business decision. It's not going to be the best decision for them to try and integrate or morph that into their product. So they just kind of eliminate it. And they've gotten better by making everyone else worse again, rather than getting better. And that, it's a purely business decision, and it makes sense from a dollars and cents standpoint. Yeah, it's
It was funny.
that's capitalism for you.
One of the things you just said, for that around like trying to do it themselves internally. Um, Again, I'll try to stay away from names, but I was at an organization and we try to build something internally for user based classification. So like the end user being able to do it instead of content inspection or something like that. And we were trying to build it internally, and the organization was trying it. Just it wasn't the same. We integrated with a couple other solutions that we would put into the product, and just we would use the stuff and the whatever. And what happened was when that company got acquired, they then said you need to acquire these other few because we can't do it as
Yeah.
well as these companies can, and I'm telling you the product works better with these. So they just bought them all.
Yeah.
And so that's a business decision, but there's also a technical aspect to that where it's like we it's just not going to work. So
I've also seen it go on the very offensive acquisition side, where because a competitor is integrating well with this other company, let's acquire that company so then they can't integrate with them anymore because
yeah,
it's doing well for them. So there's these very strategic, weird acquisitions that oh, well, I guess we're not going to be able to partner with them anymore. And that integration is going to fall off a little bit. So there's this very unfortunate, from a technology and advancement standpoint, that the business side sometimes takes some good down with it. But it's still
yeah,
interesting to
yeah.
see.
It's yeah. There are a lot of different drivers for why acquisitions are happening. Right, like we're going for a lot of them. That could be technical, business, more financial, just margins. Could be to take competitors out. There are a lot of different examples, I think, for it. It's the market behaving in a capitalistic way. You want every single one of these companies to think about, okay, how do I maximize shareholder return and profit and so forth? Um, there is the regulator that tries to keep them from becoming too big. We saw Google slash Alphabet going for a process, and now recently they don't need to sell their Chrome browser again. And so we'll see if that flips by the time this podcast comes out. This episode comes out, but it'll go maybe this way or that way. Um, the regulator and the regulator was chasing Microsoft all those years ago. Microsoft's probably happy that now they're chasing Google and Alphabet and not them. Finally, I remember Bill Gates needing to deal with this. Um, but I think it's good that the businesses are incentivized to take this kind of action for a variety of different reasons, a variety of different causes that further those companies. You can ask yourself, okay, does it cause issues from a competitive perspective? Does it cause prices to be higher? Does it stifle innovation? I think at least in the area of cybersecurity, there are so many sub markets and sub markets and sub markets, and that we're seeing innovation keep going. So even though Palo acquires a lot and Checkpoint acquires a lot, and many others in this space are acquiring, you still see innovation happening. You still see new capabilities being delivered to customers. You see that customers are more secure in the sense that they have more and more capabilities to protect against hackers. Of course, hackers have new ways of hacking, so it's this ongoing cat and mouse chase. But you do see that customers are getting more and more capabilities and more things that are helpful for them. So at least if you look at the evidence or just what's happening, customers aren't benefiting at a high level from what's going on, at least in the cyberspace.
I think that's a really important angle to take to answering the original question is it a good thing to consolidate and have all this in there? I would argue, let's make the statement that if we hadn't been doing this for decades, things would be even messier than they already are. Because
Yeah.
if URL filtering was still an individual point product, that'd be one other
Mhm.
thing. But now that's pretty much integrated with your gateways. So there's been these things that happened decades ago. These integrations occurred. They became standard and commonplace. They were through acquisitions and mergers, different, the firewall vendors acquiring intrusion prevention companies and acquiring URL filtering, acquiring antivirus. So they've now built them in. So you don't have to have all these different gateway solutions. You can have one gateway that does a lot of things, because there's other things now that have filled those voids of additional third-party products we have to have for other categories, because there's always a new category. There's always a new threat vector. Might have had a little technical hiccup there, but we should be back and everybody should still be where they were. But we're talking about that vendor consolidation, whether it's good from a business perspective, for a technology perspective, and is it good for all of us? Is that where we were at when we interrupted?
We were talking about innovation and capitalism.
Yeah.
How capitalism is amazing.
Well, if there was no money in it, we wouldn't see the innovation. If people aren't doing this just to be, philanthropic and say, I'm going to protect the internet because it's the right thing to do.
Well, you have people like that, right? You do come across, the sort of purists of, we want to protect the world from hackers and so forth. And let's build solutions for those. And the internet is full of that, right? So the internet is full of these sort of open source movements, these people that are just for the benefit of humanity. And I love those people and I adore those people. I do think that those people are a very small percentage of the population. So if you only relied on them for innovation, you'd be screwed.
Well, it's hard for them to compete with the ones with billions of dollars to spend.
That too. But for the same reasons, right? Why do they have billions of dollars to spend? Because somebody on the other side wants to make tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things I said before we cut was I'd never thought about it in that way. I think that because being a capitalist market, that these acquisitions are actually a good thing. It's a good thing from both the business side and the technical side, because it encourages and doesn't deter innovation and organizations trying to come up with different ways to solve problems. And because there's an outcome they can see, and it's not like they're going to get shut out. It's if your solution disrupts enough, or your solution is better than something that's already been developed, you'll get acquired, you go public, your IP can get put into a different solution. There's a number of things that can happen, and I think it's a good thing to keep trying to have people innovate. And to Yoni's point about the small subset of people, it's hard to compete when you're talking about an organization the size of Microsoft compared to the open source stuff. But it's not deterring them. The market allows them not to be deterred, and so that's a direct correlation between the business side that we talked about and then the technology side. And I hadn't thought about that at all. So that's an interesting point.
That's what we like to do, is spark thought, think about things differently. That's what I love about doing this, is hearing a different perspective or angle on something that, maybe there's more to that.
Yeah, it's not just siloed off between, this is the business side, we're the VCs, we're the suits, we're the boards, we're the these people, and then we're the technology builders, and then we're the consumer. It's kind of like all gelled into one.
But that's why it's important to understand the perspectives, where if you know that to this VC, what's important is the bottom line.
Right.
Making money is what matters to them. If it's not going to make them money, they're not going to do it. If it doesn't eventually make them money, they're going to cut bait. So you have to be aware of that when you're on the developer side, where you're doing it just because I want to make a better product, I want to do it right. But if you're not finding profit for them, it's not going to last. So, and same thing, that the people making the money need to understand what their people that are doing the development need. And it's not just about money, but it's a part of it. And everyone has to be aware of what the others need for this to continue moving forward.
And a lot of things you do see sometimes are, potential revenue benefits steering the roadmap for future products, right? So does the field steer the roadmap? Hey, we've got a deal with some large company. We got to add these features for them. That's gonna completely steer the ship in a different direction because of that. Depends on the size of the organization. If it's a startup, it's a little different. But that's something else I've seen too.
Yeah, Yeah, there's this mistake that sometimes startup founders will do is, they'll get completely steered by the customers, and especially the bigger customers. And it's hard to say no, right? When you're working with a Fortune 500 and they come and they say, well, we would love to buy your product for, I don't know, $1-2 million, but we just need these 17 features. You're like, wow, they're going to buy my product for a couple $1 million. I just need to do these 17 things. And what you sometimes don't realize is it takes you on a completely different path.
Yep.
So you need to have some kind of discipline to avoid that. There was actually a post on LinkedIn recently by a guy called Gili Ranan. He's the founder of Cyberstarts, a VC out of Israel that backed Wiz and many, many other very, very successful cyber companies. He's a competitor of my brother, so I will mention my brother too. Yoav Leitoslow, Flower Ventures. I love my brother more than I love Gili. Yoav is family. But I am mentioning Gili because he had this post recently on LinkedIn that was talking about how difficult it is for founders to stay the course and keep the discipline. And he was using the example of Wiz, where when they started with a very specific sort of CSPM type, CA, that area kind of thing. And CISOs, yeah, it's, all this letter soup. But CISOs were trying to pull them in other directions, and they stayed their course. For the first few hundred customers, they were very focused on, this is what we do, and here are the things that are adjacent to it, but we're not going to veer off that path. And I think that's important because, to your point, Michael, like you can get lost because of a big enterprise customer, and then that dilutes the value quite a bit.
Yeah, you have a lot of succumbing to the 80-20 rule. If you've got 80% of your revenue coming from one customer, then, you kind of listen to them maybe more than you should. And there have been some startups, some companies that have gone in a totally different direction, lost their fundamentals, lost their focus because of money. And that's fine. If their focus was actually making money, maybe it wasn't really wrong. Maybe it was what they were supposed to do, but sometimes it's unfortunate for the technology. Others have stayed the course and said, no, we know we're on to something good here. So we're going to keep doing that. And then if you want that other thing, go find it somewhere else.
You need to be confident in your vision.
Yeah.
You're taking a bet, right? When you're building these things, when you're doing this innovation, you're taking a bet that it's worth investing your next 5 to 8 years of your life on something. So it's a pretty big bet to take.
We've got so many different angles and perspectives here. I think we're, as we always do, we get a little bit off the topic. I want to kind of reel in because I don't want to go over. I know we all have things to do. It's not we can't dedicate the rest of our day to this. I want to be respectful of your time, Yoni, especially. So I want to try and reel us in a little bit to see if we can kind of sum up something of an answer to a very broad question of, is it a good idea to put all your cybersecurity eggs in one basket? I think we summarized earlier at the consumer level. Yes, it makes a lot of sense. Having 15 tools to manage as a home user, protecting your family, it's impractical. And yet you will still have, to your point, earlier, the home consumer level router has more security features than it once did, and that's a good thing. But you still have endpoint as well. And you've got something on your devices, hopefully protecting your children, especially if they're younger children. There's different levels of protection. But then anti-malware is kind of a no-brainer, and doing some filtering. And then likely your cloud services and your apps have other protections, anti-spam and phishing and all that. So good idea at the consumer level. At the enterprise corporate level, I think most larger organizations I work with and that I see, they still have more compartmentalization because different people, is another aspect, is we've seen vendors consolidate a tool to have one interface, but the people that need those different functions of the tool are different people, and they don't want to share the tool. I manage endpoints, you manage firewalls. We don't get along well. We want to swim in our own lanes. And if you put our tool in one tool, we're not happy. I've seen that play out in interesting ways in the business side. So it's, I don't think there's an easy way to answer this.
No,
once you
not.
get beyond the obvious smaller scale, consolidation helps. From a technical, fundamental using of the product scenario, as you get bigger, I think it becomes less so.
So one thing I've seen in my career is when you get to the larger businesses, it's what's the vertical that they're in? What is the business that they're doing? And just some examples, I'm just pulling these out of a hat. But, if I get sick, I'm going to go to Mass General. So if Mass General has a massive data breach, that's not going to deter me from going to Mass General for my healthcare. So are they just trying to be compliant? And I have no idea what their security stature is. I'm just saying or use like a Home Depot, right? Like Home Depot, like if I'm going to go to Ace Hardware, Home Depot to buy a hammer, if they have a massive security breach, am I not going to go to Ace Hardware, Home Depot? Now, if it's a place where the intellectual property, like the secret formula to Coca-Cola, right? So it's like stuff like that, where if it's the actual intellectual property that's being threatened, are they going to invest more in best of breed solutions rather than just trying to check a box? Those are conversations. Again, I'm not speaking for Home Depot or whatever.
Well, that's the issue, the value, what's the actual threat and the risk and what's the justification in spending. Right. And that's we've talked about that in other episodes. How much should I spend? We just recorded, what makes sense. And the more you consolidate, in theory, the less expensive things need to be. You get that kind of volume purchasing, buying 3 products from one vendor is less expensive than buying them from 3 different vendors, but it doesn't always make the most sense.
I'm already paying for this. I'm getting the solution from what I'm already paying for. Well, is that solution gonna stop? Because what is the impact if your business gets crippled by some sort of thing? Right. So I don't think people are going to stop going to Mass General anytime soon.
It also overlaps into the discussion of the concept of defense in depth. Having somebody to keep the other guys in check is good, versus if I trust one vendor for everything. If I have one AV product at 5 different levels, why? It's the same database. If they don't have that latest signature, it's going to make it through all 5 levels, versus having 5 different AV engines. If one of them gets it, I'll catch it. And that's a good thing. So that's a very simple, rudimentary example. But having different vendors to keep each other in check sometimes is beneficial.
And also certain. Sorry, go ahead, Yoni. I've been talking for a while.
I will also say the reverse of that is, we have really short attention spans these days, right? We're the TikTok generation, the YouTube Shorts generation, and I think people are also getting really, really overwhelmed. So while defense in depth has a lot of value and using different vendors has merit, we also need to remember that at the end of the day, we have humans managing these systems until AI replaces all of us, and then we're done and we're fine. But
different episode.
Until that point, another episode, exactly. But until that point, you got to realize that there's the side of just the sheer overload of tools and interfaces you need to deal with, and if a big vendor acquires a lot of, this is funny, this camera thing.
Your cameraman's all over the place.
It's like, so it's this feature that enables itself on its own, and then it starts following me around, drives me crazy. This is technology failure. I can talk a whole episode just about that. But, in these days, I think there's value in those integrations happening and in making it easier for the customer to maintain this thing, to maintain this really sprawling infrastructure instead of tools. So there's that case for it.
Yeah, I also think another example in my past life that I've seen, I don't try to leave names out of this, but different business units within a major corporation could have different needs. So I was working with an organization that, they build toasters or they build whatever ovens. Like, do they care if the oven plans that are get taken out? No, but they also could have hangers with DoD applications that stuff can't leave. So there's a different spend there because it's not a toaster, it's an engine for a fighter plane. Like, that stuff can't leave. And so there's different reasons for why they would try to look for best in breed rather than consolidation, because it's not like it's imperative. It could be national secrets. It could be anything on that front too. So
we have clients with multiple different competitors in the same product category, different firewall vendors, because they have different specialties for different areas. Different departments need different things. Sometimes those came through acquisition too, and they inherited those other solutions. But other times it's a deliberate. We want this product here, but we want this other competitor here.
Or we maybe don't need this product to be there. That could be some of it.
But departmentally, it's almost like they're different companies with different, sometimes autonomous controls and staff too. So the consolidation doesn't help them in many cases, but it's. I think we've asked ourselves one of those impossible to answer questions. Is putting your cybersecurity eggs in one basket a good thing? I think it's bad. And Yoni's got to leave. It's half past a freckle on Yoni's wrist, so we got to let you go. But thank you so much. Do we agree? We can't really answer. We did our best to talk around it.
Yeah, I think the answers in the eye of the beholder, and your own mileage may vary, and your requirements are yours, and everybody's a special snowflake.
Especially Yoni. Anyway, and he doesn't get them in Southern California. He doesn't get so. Thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you.
Thanks for having me here. It was great to meet you, Michael.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. I learned a lot too.
Real enjoyment. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one, and stay safe.